In this video, I'm going to talk about proper practices in sketches. But before I begin, I want to discuss the concept of constraints. Constraints are all the definitions that we provide to the software to fully define a sketch, part, or an assembly. We can divide constraints into two categories. Ground constraints, which tell the software where the object is located in space, and geometric constraints, which tell the software how the object is shaped. So now let's get started with the sketch. I can start my sketch if I click anywhere in space, but I want to make sure I'm selecting my starting point with purpose. The starting point may define the location of the object, so I want to make sure that I'm providing a proper definition or relationship between the starting point and other features within this coordinate system. It is important for me to take a moment and think about how my part, my design, my coordinate system are related. You don't have to put your starting point on the origin, but wherever I put it, it should be logical for my design. So maybe I want to start my point on the horizontal axis, or maybe a little bit off the horizontal axis. Wherever you put it is fine, as long as it makes logical sense for your design. The placement of your part with respect to the given planes and the origin does matter, and you should think it through. So I'm going to start here and click on my first point. As I move around, Solidworks is going to provide some suggestions. If it thinks I'm trying to make a horizontal line, it's going to suggest a horizontal line, and the same for vertical. These are examples of geometric constraints. If I opt into these, SOLIDWORKS will keep this line horizontal, no matter how else I modify the part, and prevent me from changing it, unless I go in and remove that constraint by clicking on it and hitting my delete button. I can also delete it by right-clicking and hitting delete. Maybe I want that line to be at an angle. I can just click and drag it wherever I want it to be. I'm going to hit my line tool and finish making my shape. As I continue my shape, you can see that it has some other suggestions for me as well. It asks if I want to align my endpoints, make something parallel, or let's see if I can get it to suggest perpendicular right there. It may suggest that I intersect with this plane as well, but I want to opt out of all of these. You always want to be mindful of if you accept or reject these suggested constraints. They can always be modified, but sometimes I like to purposefully make my initial sketch a little more dramatic than it actually is, so I don't accidentally accept a constraint that I didn't want. And I can always add constraints in after, which I will show you next. Now that I've finished my shape, I'm going to maybe add a circle here. And if my circle intersects with my edge and I want to delete this part of the arc and this part of the line so that this is one shape, I can use my trim entities and I can click and drag through the lines I want to delete. Over here, you can see some other options I have with the trim tool, but I typically just use the click and drag method for something like this. Now that I'm done, I want to properly define my object by putting in dimensions and constraints. So I'm going to check this trim tool and add some constraints. If I want to add constraints to a line, I'm just going to click on it. And over here on the left, let me move my picture to the other side. Over here on the left, it's going to give me some options. I can make it horizontal, vertical, or I can fix it. And this is also where I can dimension it as well. I'm going to save dimensioning for last and make this line vertical. If I want to constrain the relationship between two lines, I'm going to click on one, hold my control key, and click on another. And then you can see a couple more options show up. I can make them equal in length. I can make them parallel, perpendicular, collinear, and then vertical and horizontal are still there. So for these, I'm going to make them perpendicular. Next, I'm going to take these two lines and make them parallel. And for these two lines here, I could dimension them to have the same value, but it's much more efficient to just set them equal to each other. This is because we want to keep our designs as robust as possible and make editing simple, so try and take advantage of constraints whenever possible. I want the center of the circle to be on this line, so I'm going to make it coincident, and the same for the horizontal. Next, I want to make these equal as well. And I'll make them perpendicular. Now I want to add a couple of dimensions. There's a couple ways I can do this. I can, like I showed you before, click on the line and modify my dimension right here. Or I can click on the Smart Dimension tool up here. I can left click on the line and I can left click off the line to have that dimension pop up. Another thing I can do is right click and my Smart Dimension tool is available there as well. To dimension an angle, I'm going to click on two lines next to each other and left click again, and that angle will pop up. Now at this point, you can see that there are two colors for my lines. Some are blue, like over here, and some are black, like this here and this as well. These blue lines mean that these are weak dimensions, and the black means that they are strong. We want to make sure our sketch is fully defined, so we want all of our lines to show up in black. So since there are still some blue lines, this means I'm missing dimensions, and I'm going to continue adding them in. Now all my lines are black, meaning the sketch is fully defined. And there's just a couple more things I want to show you in this video. So if you remember, this line and this line are perpendicular. So if I were to try to add an angle here, this would be overdefined. And I have this window pop up letting me know that this is overdefined and giving me some options with what I want to do. But for now, I'm just going to cancel that. Another thing I want to show you is if I click on a dimension that is a radius of this circle, I can change that to show diameter, just like that. And similar to deleting any constraints just by hitting the delete key on my keyboard, I can delete dimensions the same way, or I can right click and delete as well. So these are the tools that you can use to fully constrain and dimension your sketch. Now remember that you always want your sketch to be fully defined and use constraints as much as possible to avoid repetitive dimensioning.